All right, so today this week, we are focusing on career counseling for people with disabilities. And if I were on the other side, I would think, why in the world are we focusing on these? We're all in the rehab counseling program, or the rehab counseling track, I should say. And some of you are working in vocational rehabilitation right now, so this should be relatively easy. The focus of the chapter, though, is taking the perspective of a career counselor, so somebody that's not being hired specifically to work with individuals with disabilities, but somebody that is doing career counseling and happens to have a client with a disability. Now, I know that there are a lot of us, when we talk about the need for mental health counselors in general to be knowledgeable about careers, about career development, and more specifically about what all of that means for a person with a disability, because people that are working strictly in mental health counseling, which may be some of you as well, down the road, they're still going to be working with people with disabilities. You're not going to get away from it. So it may be that you're not working in a specific state agency, a vocational rehabilitation state agency, where that is kind of the bulk of what you're doing, is providing career guidance and development for people with disabilities. But nevertheless, all of our clients need to work. People need to work. I've said this before. I'll say it a million times. Unless you're working solely with the weary well, you're going to be working with somebody that has likely some type of disability, which could be physical or a mental disability, just depending on the individual that you're working with. And in the upcoming weeks, we'll talk about, recovery and people in recovery, and how that even working with individuals in recovery can be working with somebody with a disability too. So, it is important. I think one of the reasons I selected this specific text is because some career counseling texts don't even talk about working with people with disabilities. And so I thought that Zunker did a relatively good job at reviewing the high points of it, the key things that a career counselor would need to take into consideration. And of course, these are things that we do know. We already know these things from being, from the work that you guys have already done in our program. So you're aware that when we're working with individuals with disabilities, we're considering their unique perspective. We are taking into consideration what that specific disability, what their limitations are, what the onset of the disability. Is it something was it a congenital disability? Was it a result of an injury? Are we talking about somebody that is now has a specific disability rating because of a workers' compensation related injury? So there's a lot of different factors that we would take into consideration in gathering that information, that background information about the client that has a disability that's looking for career counseling services. So we're not ever labeling anybody, using person first language, of course, which you guys do a great job with, and so I don't feel the need to really overly focus on that, although of course pointing out that language changes and is modified, and so we want to be reflecting the correct terminology to our clients when we're working with people with disabilities in general. The text really talks oddly about Title III specifically, and mentions Title III even in the PowerPoints if you're looking through those. We're thinking about the ADAA, and the amendments have been around for a while. The ADA has been around for a really long time now. But when working with somebody with a disability and doing career development and job placement and all the things that come in between all of that, the assessments, the evaluation, from the perspective of the individual going out and working for an employer, that we're looking at Title I of the ADA, the employment provisions, and what that looks like for that client. When we're thinking about our office and our need to provide accessible services to people with disabilities, that's going to be depending on where you work, Title III, or potentially a mix between Title II and Title III, again, depending on where you work, or the Rehab Act, but we won't go into that. So I put up a short list of resources within this module on job-seeking resources for individuals with disabilities, because there are specific job-seeking resources for individuals. And so I hope that you find it useful. I have also included information from, sorry, I'm pulling it up right now so I don't forget anything, from the Job Accommodation Network. So, I'm always going to refer to Jan as a great resource for both you as a counselor and a client, and that goes for anybody that's doing career counseling, clinical mental health counseling, rehab counseling, doesn't matter. If you're looking for information to help or assist an individual in understanding what they are, what they're entitled to, what their rights are under the ADA, the things they can ask for in the workplace, types of accommodations that can be provided. For me, the biggest take home with career counseling and doing career counseling with individuals with disabilities is that the options are limitless, truly, in this day and age, for individuals with disabilities to hold and be successful in any number of jobs. And so we're really not limiting somebody's potential. We are going through the process just as we would with somebody that didn't have a disability. We are finding out what our clients are interested in, what their background is in, what experience they have, what volunteer work they've done. We're providing them with assessments. We might be taking those additional steps in the rehab counseling world to go through different evaluations. But in terms of just that general career counselor, kind of the process isn't really going to look all that different, except there are these other little factors that we need to consider. What is the person able to do? And more than that, if there are limitations, if there are work-related limitations or barriers to employment, which I provided some information on as well from the ARC, employment barriers that do exist for people with disabilities, that's where the accommodation piece comes in. And that's where our knowledge as rehab counselors really shines through, is because we do know that employers need to make accommodations for potential employees, for applicants going through the application process. And we are aware of the extent to which an employer might have to do that, and how we can, assist an individual in asking about those types of accommodations in the workplace. So I've also provided, kind of going back to Jan, so they're a great resource. I provided some disability disclosure and employment information from Jan, from the Job Accommodation Network. I work with a lot of clients that felt like they wanted to disclose and needed to disclose their disability status, like on their resume, on an application, or right at the onset of an interview. And so, for me, my stance on it would be to respect what my client wanted to do, inform them of the potential pitfalls that could come with disclosing a disability prior to being offered a job, things that could happen, and how it can be difficult for, an enforcement agency, for example, to show that that person was discriminated against because they disclosed earlier within the application process. So Jan offers a nice kind of overview of the do's and don'ts, reasons why somebody might want to wait to disclose or should be waiting to disclose. But at the end of the day, it's about what a client wants to do. And so if I did ever have a client that wanted to disclose their disability prior to being offered a job, or needed to talk about their disability because it was an obvious disability or a visible disability, that would be a place that I could do some role playing with a client and kind of be that employer on the side of the employer, and have my client kind of practice what they were going to say, their little elevator pitch, their spiel about what would make them qualify for the job, regardless, or regardless of the limitations that were visible or whatever it might have been. So check out the resources that I have available. I hope they are useful. That's a limited number. There's a lot of different resources out there for people with disabilities in terms of helping them find jobs and maintain employment. That's always important as well. So going back to specific problems, and needs of working with individuals in career counseling that have disabilities. We talked about assessments. Sometimes assessments might need to be modified or adapted, or maybe we're not using a specific assessment because it's not appropriate to use for that population that we're working with. We need to make sure our services are accessible, that our buildings are accessible. Of course, any counselor, and I do think that rehab counselors especially do a great job at promoting the potential for individuals with disabilities to thrive in our communities and employment settings specifically. And so part of the work that we do is from an advocacy standpoint, and working with communities, within our communities, and fostering those relationships relationships with within our communities so that we are knowledgeable about what jobs are available and what resources are available for our clients with disabilities. In rehab counseling, it may be that you're working with a client, with their guardian, with a parent, with a significant other, with a family unit. So the role of a career counselor and working with somebody with a disability can be extended out to working with other people as well. We're going to be talking more about education and transition services, and the upcoming modules as we kind of wind down this summer session. So I'm not going to go into great detail today about individual education plans or IEPs, because we're going to be getting a little bit more in depth with that when we look at career development for people in high school and beyond. That's really where, as far as a rehab counselor's role, if you're working for a state agency again, you may be involved in a transition team and working with students with disabilities at the high school level, and then you may be kind of looking at their IEPs while developing your own IPE for the individual to use once they transition out of high school. I'm not going to talk at all about state rehabilitation programs because you guys know about state rehabilitation programs. And for the discussion board this week, what I really want you guys to do is to look at I provided a case study. It's a brief case study from the text, and just kind of think about different ways in which the career counselor might address the individual, Jack, that is coming in for career counseling services. So, I hope it provides a useful tool for you all to kind of think about what you might be doing if you're working as a career counselor, and as somebody with a disability walks in your office and is looking for some assistance. So with that, I'll leave you guys to it, and if you have any questions or concerns or problems with things, just let me know. I'd be happy to help you out.